Having raced over 32,000 miles, overcoming fog, icebergs and a variety of design problems, NCB Ireland sailed into Dunleary Harbour, accompanied by a flotilla of boats and the Navy's biggest ship, the Ellie Etna. The boat received a 13-gun salute from the Defence Forces in the presence of the Taoiseach as she sailed into harbour.
We're very proud of her and her crew, first of all. When I was here on the 13th of August last year sending her off, I said I hoped they would acquit themselves well, and they've done exactly that.
So you think it's done a lot for Irish sailing?
Oh, it's done an awful lot for Irish sailing, yes, and it's given a basis for further competition, and I hope we'll avail of it. I'm sure we will.
Hundreds of people lined the pier to welcome the NCB boat back. The crew, led by skipper Joe English, were then officially welcomed home by the Taoiseach. The skipper later spoke of some of the high points of the race.
Probably the highest point when we were sailing was in the last leg. We worked hard, we got the boat up into third position, we held on into third position for a number of days, and I think to see the guys, the actual determination, the enthusiasm at that time was just fantastic.
Over to you, Pete.
Thanks, Alex. I think everyone's in, are they? Yeah, okay. Good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining us for what's the second in our webinar series. A lot of you would have been here for the last one that the lads did. It was brilliant. Talk about the nooks and crannies in the harbour, and I'm glad to report that it inspired Alex and myself to paddle from Manan Bridge to Fountainstown last Sunday. But there'll be no repeat after this one. So I suppose, yeah, on the point of Alex, thanks a million. Alex, he's suffering from a bout of volunteerism at the moment, and he's doing great work around the club, and he's sitting in the background tonight doing all the tech for us. So thank you, Alex. Just to give you a bit of background on the idea behind the webinar, I suppose from my own perspective, I just been kind of thinking about it, and maybe how NCB and the project didn't get the full recognition that it probably deserved. And if you look back, there has been nothing like it really since, yet I still think it's tinged with a bit of negativity for some reason. So maybe we just kind of take an opportunity to reflect back on it. We could have done a week of webinars. It was such an Irish project, and from Joe as skipper to the Bushes, Ron Holland, the concept of the whole thing, the funding of it, the design, the build, the crew, everything, you could get the week out of it. But we've decided to take a slightly different tack and get two of the guys that were involved on the ground just to give us their sort of individual experience of it. And I know there's probably a few others on the webinar tonight that were involved in the crew or the build team. And if you could be so good as to maybe just drop a little note into the chat box, Alex will pick it up just to say that you're here, and we're delighted that you are here, and the lads will know what not to say about you then as well. So I suppose firstly just to introduce the guys. We've Bob McCarthy. Good morning, Bob, all the way from Melbourne. You're back in lockdown, I think, are you?
No, well, firstly, good morning or good evening, and thanks for organising this, Peter, and thanks for inviting me. Thankfully, no, we're out of lockdown. We were a week or two ago when we last talked, Pete, but we're in the all clear.
Okay.
Back to relative normality.
Great. Okay, brilliant. And above you on my screen anyway, and further down in West Cork, is it lock-ins or lockdowns, Dave?
Lockdown, yeah. Yeah, we're in for a while, I think.
And you're busy building a boat, I believe.
Yeah.
Rebuilding or building? Building.
I'm building a little motorboat for myself just to help with the lockdown, keeping me busy. No major rush to finish it either,
Okay. Yeah, good man. Okay. So I suppose I think Alex has a little bit of a video there that he's going to play just to bring us all back maybe and remind us of the scale of the project. So bear with us. I think it's about 2 or 2:30 long. But Alex, if you want to hit play on that, please.
Problems in the Dáil and an impending EEC summit, the Taoiseach yachtsman himself attended the launch of the campaign, which will cost £3.5 million, 40% of it already underwritten by national and city brokers. And the Taoiseach made it clear to the many businessmen present that he sees the challenge as a major boost for Ireland.
The launch of the most exciting and prestigious project upon which the Irish sailing world has ever embarked. I see the Irish challenge in the whitbread race as part of the modern image of Irish sportsmen, a capacity to display the commitment, skill and courage needed to take on the best that the rest of the world can offer in different sectors and go on to win.
But can Ireland win a race of nearly 33,000 nautical miles?
I think the standard in Ireland has got to a stage where we can now go centre stage. We can meet the rest of the world, face to face and win. Our standard has built up over the last half generation, really, and I feel now we're good enough.
Do you think we have a real chance in a race of that calibre?
If we didn't have, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't lend my name to anything unless I thought we could win it. I believe we can win it, and I believe we can do it in style. I believe this can show Ireland really at its best. We have the sailing skill. It'll be managed tremendously well. You've seen the list of names. It's a who's who of Ireland backing it. And I think it'll be a great vehicle too for Irish companies. But the important thing is the sailing. And we can design it, and we can produce it, and we can race it to the highest level.
So it's no small challenge. This is a significant thing for Irish yachting and the determination to win.
It's not alone significant for Irish yachting. I think it's one of the major sporting efforts Ireland's made in recent years. Going centre stage in such a major sport, such a big investment, it's a big commitment of important people in terms of success in this country who have lent their names to it. So it's being treated very, very seriously. It's probably, I think, one of the most exciting things Ireland's been involved in sport ever.
We're tapping right into what is a very efficient high-tech network, which is not always appreciated that it exists in Ireland. The universities, to start with, are behind us. We have Shorts in Belfast, who are in the carbon fibre area, very high-tech people. We have DuPont in Derry, the world-class in terms of resins and plastics. There is so much to go for. It's all there.
What about raising the finance needed? It's a lot of money to try to put together.
Yes, it is. It's a significant challenge, but we think it can be done, and we wouldn't be.
Despite problems in the Dáil,
Thanks, Alex. Okay, so we can see what a massive undertaking it was, and I suppose maybe if we just step back or aside, I'm not sure, first, and Dave, could I just go to you, and could you kind of bring me back to where you were at, maybe before the project, how you got involved in the build, or what you were doing, how did you end up inside in the shed in Ballyfermot, and just tell us a bit about the build and the atmosphere and the excitement, maybe.
Yeah, it's a sort of, it was a progression really, I suppose. I mean, I'd served my time in Crosshaven Boatyard back in 76. I went in there, finished in 79, and then went professional sailing. I did want to go professional sailing in 76, but my dad said, no, you've got to get a qualification in something first. So I served my time as a shipwright, and then basically the Friday I qualified, I got on a plane and flew to the Caribbean, and I was professional sailing then for up to basically the day that NCB was sort of being talked about. And I was running Jameson Whiskey for Richard Burrows at the time. And literally that finished, and I was brought straight in as foreman for the build of the boat in Ballyfermot, with the intention of being on the crew as the sort of the person in charge of the boat, basically. And that's really how it started. And it was like the whole thing was just an amazing setup for that time. If you think of it, in 1987, a full shed out in Ballyfermot with another shed built inside that shed in order to be able to maintain heat. We were dealing with products that had never been used before. We were the first boat, I think, ever to use pre-breg carbon, Kevlar carbon, which was an amazing product. like the cloth came off the roll and it was dry, and it was only when you heat it that it actually, the liquid came out of the cloth. And that was a whole new concept. So, I mean, all of us were dealing with stuff we hadn't dealt. Even Killian and Rob Lipsett, who were the two main builders, the two of them hadn't dealt with this stuff either before. So the whole thing was a whole new idea, you know, and it was fantastic to be involved in it, you know.
What sort of numbers were involved in, say, just the build phase of it? Was there a shed full of fellas running left, right, and centre?
Well, basically, there was a nucleus of people. There was Rob, and there was Killian, and then there was. Can you remember his name, Bob? The fellow who was the shore boss. What was his name again? The Australian guy. You're muted.
I think you're referring to Peter McCarthy. Would that be right?
Peter McCarthy. And then there was a couple of other guys like Terry Gould and Mark Bush, and a couple of people that were actually brought in from day one. And then there was basically, it was kind of opened up to people who were prepared to take on the job. And there was people, I think Garrett Connolly is in there somewhere. He came in from day one. There was loads of people. I can't just think of the names. And then there was a couple of local guys that lived in Ballyfermot were taken on and went on as a career in boat building after it, you know. So there was a lot of opportunities.
Left a legacy.
Ray O'Callaghan was another one that was brought on full time. He was another shipwright, full-time shipwright. And so, yeah, it was, I can't remember exactly the number of people that were on the bill, but there was people coming and going.
Okay.
But it was around that.
Okay. Okay, so Bob, moving over to you. So Dave has said to me in the recent past, when I was asking him, that he picked you out day one, first day he met you. He said, this guy is going to get selected. You were a young gun in the Navy at the time. So again, you saw the video there with all the good and the great, and you know how exciting this was. So how did you get from a young fella in the Navy to going around the world?
Well, Dave's been very complimentary. Thank you, Dave, for that, and to call me a young gun. I'm sure many of the colleagues who are looking at this, I see some of them would have a giggle about that. But yeah, I was in my mid-20s. I had been a naval officer since I was, well, in the Navy since I was 18. And I guess even long before that, I had read books about the Whitbread Round the World race. I had a huge interest in offshore racing, even though I hadn't really participated much in it. But it captured my imagination. And indeed, I remember about 4 years prior to the '89 race, as I recall, Lion, New Zealand visited the Royal Cork Yacht Club, either on its way to or its way back from the Fastnet race. And I remember going down and looking at the boat, and I was at a reception in your club where the crew were involved. And I remember dreaming strongly about doing the race. So yeah, my involvement, it was very opportune. It happened at the right time for me. I don't know if you're aware, Peter, but the intent of the boat was, or the intent of the campaign was for it to be an all-Irish campaign. And to that end, they built the boat in Ireland, obviously, as David has said, and they also wanted to attract a fully Irish crew at the outset. And one of the ways they did that was they advertised it in the national newspapers. And I looked for this after our chat a couple of weeks ago, and I couldn't find the ad. But they literally went in the jobs section of the Sunday Independent. I saw the ad to join NCB Ireland. And I applied, and those watching will giggle about this. I applied in writing. I wrote a letter and applied to join the crew back in 87, 88. I think it must have been 87. And I and many others were invited to a series of physical tests and, as I recall, some psychometric tests in University College Dublin. And I saw Garrett Connolly there. I think, Garrett, you might remember, I think that was 2 days, if I'm not mistaken, where they put us through the ringer on the track in the gym. And as we jokingly said, we did a psychometric test to see if we were mad enough to go on the race. and obviously we were deemed, the initial group of people who got through it, we were deemed to be insane enough to do the race. So Peter, yes, I went through that process of firstly applying for and then getting to go through a series of trials over the next, as I recall, 7, 8 or 9 months, until finally I struck it very lucky and got to start and indeed finish the race on the boat.
And what sort of racing background had you at that stage? To go to all of a sudden in the Whitbread, like where did you come from racing wise?
Yeah, I certainly didn't come from a racing pedigree. I grew up in Loughrea, County Galway. We sailed with my dad on the lake there. I sailed enterprises with him, subsequently mirrors, lasers. I got into windsurfing, but certainly was never involved in any offshore sailing until I joined the Navy in '81 and got involved with our own sail training yacht. At the time it was called Talcha. Not racing, offshore sailing. I dreamed of getting involved in sailing and eventually found my way onto the mighty Moonduster for a couple of events. But certainly my offshore sailing pedigree was really non-existent in comparison to Dave and many of the others who were on the boat. So yeah, you know, all things considered, I certainly consider myself very fortunate that I got to do the race without a pedigree.
Like I was obviously only a small child at the time, watching the updates on, was it Sports Stadium it was called, on RT, and we sometimes record it, or you know, if you missed it we set to record. But and it might be just my perception, you'd know better, but was there not as many sort of different round the world races? Like, was there much more of an aura around the Whitbread at the time? It was it, wasn't it? It was the World Cup. And I think, was there the nations? It was more linked to the nations back then as well, was it? Yeah,
that's right. So two things, you're correct. I think now this is my opinion, the Whitbread Round the World race was it was said, the most prestigious race. Certainly, as I recall, it might have been the only crewed race at the time that went around the world. And it was also seen as being quite I'll pick the word here, you represented your country. Now, this wasn't the case every time, but predominantly the boats represented their country. So NCB Ireland represented Ireland, the Swiss boats and New Zealand boats, they tended to represent their country and be fully crewed by people from that country. I'm not sure if that was a rule of the race at the time, but it certainly was the way that the race was won. So yeah, personally, I do recall I saw it as, in addition to doing something I'd always dreamed of doing, I saw it as representing our country as well, which added to the sense of pride I felt, I must say, to do the race. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I remember outside our fourth class classroom in primary school, there was a poster of you and all the little pen picks, and there was the campaign around, you know, the boat, or well, I think it was just the plug, maybe, was it taken around Ireland on tour and all that. So, you know, it hit us at that level. Now, obviously, I would have had some sort of interest in sailing, but even still, it was transcending into the national school, I suppose, you know. Okay, so we saw the video there and the expectation maybe, or the hype, and I suppose, you know, they obviously had to give a certain level. There was investment needed. You're not going to get investment if you say, yeah, we're going out to give it a lash. But I suppose there was probably a lot of pressure leading into it, or did you notice that? Were you aware of it beforehand? And we'll probably touch on it later as to what it was like during the race, but pre-race, were expectations, you know, as crew and guys involved on the ground, did you feel they were, I suppose, what you were hearing, was it matching what you were feeling? Either of you can take that one.
Well, Dave, you had a great story about the transatlantic race that we ran, or a great recollection when I guess our expectations were dragged back down to reality with a certain event, if that's the right way of saying it.
Yeah, I mean, just to go to that photograph behind me is the start of that race. That was the transatlantic race from Newport. That's Newport in the background, finishing in Cork. And that was really the first offshore race we did on the boat. I think Bob is in there by the mast. I'm standing there trimming the kite. And there's I can't pick out, you could see Joe's head at the background there. And it was, this was the sort of the first feeder race that we were really matching up against one of the favorites, because there was a big rule thing going on at the time as well, because Fisher and Paykel, Steinlager and the Card were 3 catches, and they had somehow found a loophole in the IOR rule that they could sail with catches and still rate as an 81 footer. So as you can see, we're ahead of Fisher and Paykel. I'm not sure, Bob will probably tell you that there might have been another time, but that was the first and only time. And we came around the first turning mark outside Newport, ahead of Fisher and Paykel, came around the mark, and basically we were on our course for Cork, Great Circle route, of course. And she passed us to leeward and was pretty well on the horizon before the sunset, and never saw her again. And we were sailing as fast as we could go, you know. And the crew that was on board were basically nearly all Irish at that stage, you know. And that race, about halfway across, I think, Bob, you probably answer this better, Bob, but I think we hit the strongest winds of the race in total. Did we, or can you answer that one?
I think my grey hair is showing its age here now. I can't remember the specifics. I do know, however, that by any measure, we found that we were nowhere near as competitive as we thought we would be in all conditions, to be fair. Yeah. And it was quite a come down to earth for us at the time. And, you know, our own expectations were let down, the expectations of everyone else, as you heard Harold Cudmore talking about the expectations. That was, you know, they were the expectations that we set for ourselves and that were set for us by everybody else right from the outset. And they were pretty, it was a tall order. And, but look, it was certainly disappointing when reality hit home at the time. Yeah, sure.
And those races you're talking about there now, that's all pre-race, or sorry, pre-Whitbread selection trials. And Alex has a piece of video just about the crew selection, but just before he plays it, just give us a kind of rough idea as to, like, obviously there was a panel of, I don't know how many, but you had a panel that you guys had made it onto, and you know, what I suppose, what were the actual races maybe you did, or what sort of races, or you know, the process itself, as well as you mentioned the initial screening. But when you got down to closer to being selected, like, was it a committee selected it, or, you know, how did it get ranked?
Just one thing there on that, just I know Bob has got, but the when we were doing the selections at the start, there was a lot of high profile sailors in the country were on that list, you know, a lot of high profile sailors. But doing the round the world race required a certain character. It didn't require, you didn't have to be a creme de creme sailor to go around the world. You had to be a dedicated person. You had to have the, you know, the mentality for it. You have to have the focus for it. You didn't have to be someone that, you know, sat in the high chair and said, why didn't we go that way? That wasn't my fault. You know, there could have been a lot of ego people on the boat, whereas we had a crew that basically worked very, very well together, you know, and we all made decisions. We all put our head in the pot, and, you know, 99% of the stuff we did was spot on, you know, was spot on. It just, we weren't going fast enough, you know.
Yeah, that's always the lucky sailor with the fast boat and all that. Okay, Alex, do you want to maybe run that piece of video there?
Yeah, I will. 2 seconds. Bear with me.
No pressure.
Having performed reasonably well in the Virgin Islands, NCB Ireland is now undergoing modification in Florida, particularly to her keel. There may also be sail changes, all part of the workup programme in a world campaign, and so is the announcement of the crew made today after assessment of the transatlantic sail. And it contains a few surprises. Most of all, the omission of Donald Brown from Tralee, the only one of the original panel who has actually sailed in a round-the-world race previously. 2 of the 4 Naval Service crew members have been dropped. Ronan Long from Cork and Robert McCarthy of Westport hold their places, as do 7 other Irish members. Jeff Condell from Limerick, Garrett Connolly of Dublin, and Richard Gibson, the vastly experienced Joe English and David Hart of Cork, and 2 others from Dublin, Patrick O'Brien and Kieran Tarbett. The Sail Ireland group says that New Zealander Peter Warren holds an Irish passport, making up the 10. There has been a belief in yachting circles that the American influence might move into the panel after the initial testing, and there are now 4 from the US, led by Bob Campbell, who's tipped for the skipper's job. That won't be announced for some time yet, and Sail Ireland says the best have been appointed. It argues in defence of the crew selection that many Irish international teams now have non-native members. But the selection today does cause a few surprises in sailing circles.
Dave, I'm not sure, did you spot James Fagan commenting on your look?
He's not far wrong.
I'd commented on the cricket gear that you were wearing ready for the next Ashes test, and Robert McCarthy there. So I suppose this kind of leads maybe towards there was a little bit of mention of it there, and might go to you, Dave, and your race ended a little earlier than Bob's, and you made a decision to step away. And I know it's kind of related to some of the points mentioned there, but can you maybe just flesh out what your thought process was, or how you came about and what it was like, and to having been selected and being involved in the build to now not race around the world?
Yeah, it's a weird thing, because my whole reason for the race was the race, to do it, and it was part of my career, I suppose. I think I was in that profession, and answering the question there from James, I was actually 30 in that photograph, so yeah, I did look a bit younger then. But when you look at it, it was just a stepping stone for me. And I had done a lot of sailing, and I had seen how things should work, and I'd seen how things did well and how things had fallen apart. And, for me, on the whole project was all about the team, getting a good team together, doing the round the world, enjoying it, without all the rigmarole that went with it, And I mean, when I think of it, after that transatlantic race coming back, we all arrived in Cork, and there was a couple of chins down, and, especially the people that, had a good understanding of, we're not going fast here, and there's going to have to be some big changes. But the problem is it got up into the hierarchy, and there were people were just dropped, for the reason thinking that it was the crew was the fault rather than the actual boat, and there was a lot of crew were just sorry, we're taking on more professional people to try and make this boat faster. And I think after that transatlantic, when we got into Cork, I think that's when Joe took over. And there was a couple of guys giving the flick, and then we went to the south coast of England, and we did around Ireland, I think, in between. We did a round Ireland tour, and then we went to the south coast of England, and then there was a lot of changes. We put an extra foot on the waterline of the boat. There was no talk of the keel being changed back to the bulb. We were still on the barn door, and there was the extra foot on the waterline. I'm not a naval architect, but I had done a bit of, correspondence course in naval architecture, and waterline length, yes, gives you a bit of speed, but it also put in a huge amount more of displacement into the boat as well. So there was a lot of things that were going on to try and make the boat faster. And then literally 2 or 3 weeks, I think, before the race, Bob, you can correct me if not, there was another couple of guys said, sorry, we don't need you. And that was the switch in my head that said, I'm not going around the world with this. You know, I want to go around the world with a bunch of Irish guys, and I know with my hand in my heart, I could swear that every single person that boat was going to sail that boat with passion and with everything else that they had. But my problem is that we were just diluting it and getting rid of it. So I just said, I've had enough. And I left. And to the stage that my poor old dad got a phone call to try and persuade me to go back. You know, they wouldn't ring me, but these were just, it went around the world and it did very well for what it was. But my problem, it could have done it just as well with a full Irish crew, you know, and an Irish crew that could be doing the exact same as Bob doing right here now, talking about an experience of going around the world and how it meant to him after it, you know, the amount of different jobs he got on different boats and and still doing it today. He's still sailing on professional boats, you know, and we could have had a lot of Irish guys that have had that in their back pocket, you know.
The sense I'm getting is if you strip back, obviously NCB was there and that's what's known as the sponsor, and that's fair enough. But if you go back to that and the Sail Ireland and that concept, so I'm right in saying that that project was lost, or you felt it was slipping away, that you were losing the Irish guys, and you know you wanted to go around the world, and you know however you did, but you do it together.
Yeah, I felt it was slipping, and it was slipping fast. You know, there was a lot of people that were, and I knew there was more coming. You know, and I was a watch leader on the boat, so I was, you know, I had my say, and I was able to go into the office and say, guys, you can't do this. You know, and I wasn't scared to do it. And this was probably one of the problems. Bob wants to go around the world. It didn't really hit me. I wanted to go around the world, but I want to do it on the right terms. And if I went into the office and I felt like saying something, I was just going to say it, you know, and I did say it. And Joe agreed, you know, he said, yeah, but look, there's fellas in the top office that are saying we must make it better. We must try and make it better. And that was my turn off switch, I'm afraid.
Okay. Bob, you stayed with it. So I suppose you were there throughout all this, let's call it turmoil by the sounds of it, or certainly disturbance, and you know you're still there trying to do the job and get on with it and the task at hand. So I suppose obviously with a naval background, and I don't mean just the physical side of it, which clearly I laughed when I heard or thought of you on a windsurfer or in a mirror. I just could never imagine it. But, you know, the naval background physically would have stood to you. But I would think as much, or more importantly, the sort of organizational training, the psychology that you'd get in an institution like the Navy would have maybe equipped you to deal with it. But say, you know, you kicked off the race and you went, and how was it to handle those changes and the angst or whatever was going on, and how aware were you of it, or how focused were you?
Well, firstly, Peter, there was a time when I weighed less than 100 kilograms, just for your info. And they have windsurfers now that have lots of volume, so people like me
are take you.
Everything Dave says is absolutely correct, and I likened it. And indeed, even through the race, there were concerns that you wouldn't be selected for the next leg, because we did have changes throughout the race. And it's kind of like anybody who's played a team sport, rugby or soccer or anything like that. The selection is on a Thursday night for the match on Saturday, and you know I had those concerns and was focused on making the cut each time. But I did come to this race from, I think, and I hope I say this the right way, a different space than Dave did, in that this was a childhood dream of mine to do the race, to say I've completed the Whitbread Round the World race. And so I looked at everything from a different lens perhaps than other people. And my primary goal was to do the race. So I was one of the people who wanted to make each cut. and was very fortunate that I did. So that's not to say I wasn't affected by losing some of my friends, losing as in some of my friends not continuing doing the race. And as the video clip showed, we had two friends of mine from the Navy, John Leach and Paddy O'Connor, who sadly, according to that video at that time, didn't make the cut either. So while I was, I hope I'm saying this the right way, while I was acutely aware of the changes, my primary focus was to get to do the race as a person. And so I guess I would have done the race regardless, just to do the race. I was disappointed that some of my friends didn't do it with me at the time, but as Dave said, it's certainly, my motive was different from people of David's pedigree, let's put it that way, at the time.
Okay. And the race itself then, I mean, and I don't want to focus too much on the negativity of it all. You know, so I mean, you know, there was obviously, you know, the bad press gets the most press maybe, but you know, in the race itself, like, was there times that you felt, yeah, we're getting there, we're driving the right way?
Yeah, in short, yes, no question. On the boat, we felt as a crew we raced that boat very well, and we felt good about ourselves. We felt good about how the boat was performing. We felt disappointed that our speed wasn't where it should be on the race course. And later in the race, we felt very disappointed that breakages put a big dent into our aspirations and our hopes. But alluding to the media commentary, that hurt. There's no point in pretending otherwise. When we landed in port, it was different then. Obviously, we didn't get the media coverage in real time. We tended to get it in one massive media dump when we arrived in port. And as I recall, the first leg of the race from England to Punta del Este in Uruguay, as I recall, Dermot Desmond came down to make us, to cheer us up about the bad press that we've been receiving in Ireland at that time. So yeah, it certainly grated on us, and we certainly felt, as Dave mentioned, our heads were down on occasion, and it was disappointing that we were getting less than positive feedback from people back home at the time, generally.
Yeah, what's understandable, the hurdles on the ditch and all that. I'm
not going to criticize anybody, but it's understandable. We certainly didn't perform as was expected of us. But when you're the performer, you would have liked things to be a little bit more positive.
Yeah, and I suppose, look, it really, looking at it from an outsider, complete outsider, I think it's really those expectations, you know, that maybe was where things were set wrong. I'm just going to jump back there. You mentioned the build and stuff earlier, and Alex has a video on the build as well. And I saw a comment coming in from Mark Bush saying that he thought he was the foreman on the job, which I suppose he mightn't claim it. And actually, if I just bear with me 1 second, I think here he is now. If I move that way, there is the foreman on the build. So
another man who has never aged.
Yeah. So Alex, do you want to roll that video maybe?
The 32,000-mile Whitbread race is held every 4 years and is regarded as the ultimate sailing challenge. It's the world's greatest sailing marathon, attracting competition from all over the globe. The 82-feet-long Irish yacht, which will enter next year's race, is now under construction in Dublin. The Minister for the Marine, Brendan Daly, and the Minister for Sport, Frank Fahey, have been to see the work already completed on the yacht's deck in the custom-made, humidity-controlled production area. The latest laser beam technology is being used.
It's built out of modern plastics, so we first have to build a wooden former of the deck, as you can see here, and also the hull. These will then be scrapped after the plastic boat has been built off them. The number and amount of items to be bought from the boat are just immense. There are thousands and thousands. Each has to be organised, ordered, processed, paid for, and got here.
The Irish Challenge, which is being sponsored by business interests, will cost about £3.5 million, but confidence is high.
In spite of the fact that there are places like New Zealand, Australia, America, and all of the European countries going into it, I think we're up there at the very top. I'm thrilled to think that that sort of technology is in Ireland and that we are at the best in the world at doing something like this. I think we're going to win.
And already a leading bookmaker has placed Ireland as second favourites to win the race, which will start in September 1989.
Yeah, it just gets worse and worse from an expectation level, doesn't it? Second favourites to Fergal Quinn to this couldn't go right, really. You were goosed from the start. Yes, I suppose on the the race, and you mentioned gear failures and stuff, and the race itself, and I think it was the boom had a tendency to break a little, wasn't it? And did you have rudder trouble as well, maybe? But just, and like, I'm not trying to get at like the design or the build, it was what it was, but just again from a sailor's point of view, you're hurtling down waves in the middle of the ocean, something goes. Like, I suppose from 2 points. One, you're in the middle of a race. How do you keep the intention and the momentum up? And from a sort of a jury rigging builder's point of view, what's it like? Is it everyone out of their bunks, all hands on deck, or what actually happens?
Well, yes, to everything you've just said there. And I notice, I see on my screen, I see Kieran Tarbert there. Good to see you, Kieran. Kieran might disagree with me on the specifics of this, but the Vang on NCB Ireland was, Kieran, David, you might correct me if I've got the specifics wrong, was a hydraulic ram that hung vertically from the boom onto a semicircle track that was on wheels. Is that a fair description, Dave?
Yeah, you can see it in the photograph behind me there, just a vertical. There was also a ram that just held the boom up, but the actual Vang itself, the pressure down, the Vang was actually a hydraulic ram basically on a car that went semicircle from basically sheer to sheer, went the whole way around. So the vertical pull on the boom was huge. And I'm sorry, Bob, just 1 second. The whole thing with the boat, the boat was fine, but I'm sure for a lot of people that are listening in, if they can remember the IOR days, it was all about displacement, and it was all about put more volume in the boat to help the boat rate properly. So the loading on the boat was huge, and it's the same for all the others. But I know that Fisher and Paykel and the Card had reduced loading because they didn't have the same main size. They didn't have the same spinnaker size. It was transversed into a lot of different parts of the boat. But I mean, with regards to NCB, the loadings were huge. And in a lot of wind, you could look at the guy, which were wire on her, by the way, they were wire. They would change diameter. You watch a gust hit and you'd watch 12 mil wire suddenly turn into like 10 or 11 mil wire, and so the loadings were huge. So if you came off a wave and you hopped in front on the wave in front of you, if you weren't with that Vang, it just wasn't quick enough to release. You couldn't release that Vang to let the boom up quick enough to take the load off. Sorry, Bob, I'm interfering you there.
No, there's nothing to be sorry about. I'm glad you came in. The short answer is there's a lot of load on that Vang. And as you know, and sorry about the background noise, we have a bit of construction going on next door. It's early in the morning here. As you know, breakages never happen when the sun is shining and the seas are flat, just for whatever reason. So we were hurtling downwind in big seas with the kite up, as I recall. This is certainly my memory. When snap, the boom went, and the back end of the boom jumped up in the air, and sure, we all slowed down and all that type of thing. So to answer your question, Peter, yeah, everyone's dragged out of their bunk. I can't remember what time of day it was, and it took a very long time to fix the mess, as you can imagine. Get the mainsail down, put away the 2 broken parts, brush ourselves down, figure out what to do. And as I recall, it took a number of days to fix the boom and to get it back to some of the strength that it had before. but it certainly made a huge impact on that second leg of the race. Kieran, have I got that right? Second leg of the race to Fremantle, the Southern Ocean leg. And yeah, very, very disappointing. It hurt us a lot. And then to add insult to injury, it happened a second time in a subsequent leg of the race. You know they say about learning from your mistakes. Well, clearly we didn't. So it was very upsetting. Yes.
It's when you talk in days, I suppose it puts into perspective that you were, I will use the term meandering, but that you were in a bit of a limbo for a couple of days while you're going to get it sorted. And is there contemplation of retiring, or is it a case of just you take your time, you fix it, and you get going again? Or
retirement was never on the cards. We were along. You must remember the Whitbread back then didn't have any southerly limit on the race, on how far you could go. They do now for all the right reasons. The boats are not as heavy displacement, they're possibly not as tough. So we were right down in amongst the icebergs. And again, from a personal point of view, fantastic. But from a, hey, let's just go away and motor up for a couple of days and we'll retire, that just wasn't possible. So it was either just limp along and take more than, as I recall, that second leg took 30 odd days. It possibly might have taken 40 odd days if we just limbered along. So we had to figure out a way to fix it. And we had some really good people on board who were God, I'm trying to think of that TV character, MacGyvers, who were able to figure out a way to fix it. And we got it going and we got sailing again. And I'm going to say that probably took a number of days from the length of time it should have taken us to do that race. Kieran has put a text in which stirs my memory up. He said the fuel used to power the tools, and we had to forego our drying lockers. So we had to, instead of drying our clothes, we had to use the fuel required for that to power the tools. And we at once, that's right, I do remember, food rationing was something that was on the cards. Another human story, we had just freeze-dried food from start to finish during that race. So we had the same gunk for breakfast, lunch and dinner. It tasted exactly the same. The only difference between the food in the morning and the food in the afternoon was the sauce you put on it. It was the same stuff.
I was going to try and lift it away from the negativity of breakages and repairs, and then you brought us back to the freeze-dried food.
Oh, that's not negative. that we've survived that is a positive. Let's put it that way.
And just on I suppose going back to the race itself, and the other entrants. What's the connection? I mean, like, you're out in the middle of the ocean. You don't see, is it days, weeks? Like, what sort of interaction is there? Both, I suppose, and you can answer this separately if you like, but when you're in port, getting to know the other crews, and it was sort of semi-professional, or sorry, there was professionals and amateurs, put it that way. And I know there was a much bigger fleet back then, wasn't there? It wasn't as small an operation as Around the World might be now. There was a much greater spread. So both, I suppose, taking the social or the port side first, what was it like as a festival maybe, or as a get-together?
As I recall, there were 31 or 32 boats in the race. And again, my memory has faded over the years, but certainly it was a big carnival when the fleet arrived into town. And obviously each port had a different reception, but they had a number of things in common. And Alex at the very beginning did say that he would put this up on YouTube if it was PC. So I'd like this to go up on YouTube. So I'm not going to add anything that would prevent you from publishing this, but we were greeted at each stop by a group of ladies from the Whitbread organization with champagne. I do recall how they physically were uncomfortable with the smell of the boat every time they went on it, considering that nobody washed for the entire duration of the leg. But they still persisted and had a smile when they served us our Steinlager beer or our glass of champagne. The remainder of the stopover, to me, it was a major part of the race. It was a mix of good hard work, because essentially the boat was dismantled at each stopover and put back together again. I've heard it said that a leg of the Whitbread is akin to 2 years of a club sailing, and the impact on a sailing boat. Dave, I don't know what you'd say about that, but it certainly tests the boat. So my role was that of rigger. So I was the guy who spliced the 14 mil wire-to-wire braces or guides for the boat. So we replaced all of those. The boat was stripped essentially and rebuilt. Kieran, I remember him on the dock in Punta del Este, dismantling all the winches and putting them together. So it was a combination of hard work and a great social mix with all of the other crews. I don't think there was a crew that we didn't get on well with, that we didn't interact with socially. And to be fair, like any sailing event, they were all very generous with their help and how to, make the boat go better. The New Zealanders, who were, clearly much more experienced, Peter Blake and his team, and the excuse me, the other boats, they were very helpful. And I certainly know I got to know a great deal of people who, to this day, I still know. So yeah, a mix of good hard work, to be fair, a little bit of getting to know the places we stopped over in and preparing for the next leg of the race, and the natural bit of a social element to it, which was very enjoyable.
You probably didn't mention that you were a 25-year-old naval officer to any of the women greeting you with champagne. I suppose you just got straight back helping Kieran on the winches. And
I had no interest.
Yeah,
I personally had no interest in that element of the Whitbread whatsoever.
It's not why you were so determined to do the race. No, that is interesting to hear, and as like the fact that there was 30 boats in it, 30 fully crewed boats, as opposed to the kind of double-handed or single-handed stuff that goes on now. I'll just say as well, if anyone has any questions, throw them into the chat box, and we'll throw them at the lads if they're not too hard. Or if any of Kieran or Garrett or anyone wants to jump in at any stage and contradict them or correct them, please do. I suppose.
Sorry, Peter, the good thing here is it's all over 30 years ago. So freedom of information, you can say whatever you like.
Yeah, well, sure, look, Bob's in Melbourne anyway, he doesn't care.
No, it was, sorry, Peter, just go back to going back when Bob was talking about the stuff breaking on the boat, to repair that boom, and I can understand how it took a couple of days. And you look at the modern Vendée boats where the guys are fixing the boats themselves. The repairs that they do on the boats nowadays is absolutely nothing compared to what would have had to been done on NCB or any of the boats, the big sloops, because the boom was 5 mil alloy, and everything was heavier. You could have fixed the boom, you could have brought it down below. There was probably a tent to fix it, in the modern boats, whereas NCBs, there's no way to have gone down below, probably had to be done on deck. And but I think other boats had breakages as well. That we weren't the only one, there was a lot of other stuff went wrong on other boats. It wasn't just NCB. I think there was a lot of boats because, again, IOR had this problem where it was the displacement rule. So everything just loaded up.
But Bob, did you end up with like any kind of race within a race? Like, was there any 2 or 3 boats that you were battling against, or was each leg completely different? Like I remember looking back at the results, and okay, obviously the top boys were pretty consistent, but others were jumping around. Were you in any mini battles within it?
The short answer is yes. Some specifics I do recall. Again, the second leg, it must have been the second leg. We were very deep south in the Southern Ocean, maybe 10, 12 days into the leg. And on an opposite jibe, crossing us by no more than 50 meters was British Sat-Quote Defender. And I think it was the first time we'd seen another boat since we started the race. And we didn't see them again until the finish of the race, I might add. But most of the time you didn't see anybody, since after the first day or so, people took a different navigation route. But on occasion we did interact with other boats. The shorter legs obviously were that happen more often.
And
yeah, did we have a match race at any stage? Not that I recall. Not that I recall.
And
There
just,
was a lot of, you're on your own.
yeah. And keeping focus, like, or keeping not necessarily spirits up, but just, keeping your race focused when you haven't seen boats for days and you're out in the middle of nowhere and you're maybe admiring the wildlife, or I don't know, are you? Some of us struggle to keep our attention going down a run on the Carlane Bank. I mean, it must be phenomenally draining and exhausting to do that, and then to do it as part of a team. I mean, is it just everyone is just so focused and you're so in tune at that stage, or do you have to keep kind of reinventing the spirits, if you like, or the focus?
Well, two things. Firstly, something that Dave said at the very beginning, I think needs to be restated, that a crew that works together on a boat is not necessarily a collection of the best individual sailors. And it's got a lot more to it than that. It's got people who can work together, who can pick somebody up when they're down, who can tolerate, if it were, somebody's moods, who can, lift somebody up. And certainly I was that person. I certainly got my head down on occasion. Because it's hard physically. You're wet a lot of the time. We didn't have the quality of clothing then that we do now, etc., etc., etc. But I am reminded by something that bound us all together, and it's actually Kieran Tarbett sent a direct message to me there, and I'll quote it directly. He said, "We had to push harder than the others to try and stay in touch, so we carried more sail than others at times." And I do recall that, Kieran, that was something that gave us that little, I would say, a bit more motivation and a bit more focus, because we knew we had to make up for ground that our speed lost for us, that we were just a little bit more driven to push the boat a little bit harder for the duration of the race. And yeah, I do recall that. Because we felt we had a disadvantage with speed, we felt we had to make up for it by working a little bit better together as a team. And certainly, yeah, despite the jigging of the teams and some things that happened during the race with crew changes over, I would argue that the team was quite strong during the race.
I think too, sorry, Peter, I think the one of the things there too, Bob, was that I think that round the world race was the last of the sort of amateur race. Yeah. I mean, anyone that continued to do the Whitbread or continued into the Volvo after it were basically all professionals. That was sort of the changeover from amateur to professional, and it definitely, the amateur side was definitely still there, in that race. And even to a stage I can recall on that leg, which we did Newport to Cork, and we went very far north there. I mean, it was very cold on that leg as well, if I can remember. I remember coming up out of the bunk after being off watch, and my hair was solid. It was just frozen, My body was warm, but my head didn't get any heat, so my hair was just actually frozen.
As it is now, by the looks of things.
We're kind of heading towards end of time, but Alex, have you one other video to run?
Yeah, I can do. 2 seconds.
Into deeper water offshore that she has tended to loose places, but not so this leg. At latest reports this afternoon, she's running 5th. As 20 television stations round the world covered the start, the name of Ireland was well to the fore. This evening NCB is in a group of 4 yachts only 50 miles behind the overall race leader, the New Zealand ketch Steinlager. Near her are the other New Zealand ketch Fisher and Paykel and Merit, skippered by former race winner Pierre Fellman. Rothmans, which is leading the leg, is 20 miles further away. On the spinnaker start of this leg, NCB did very well and held off the attentions of the Russian yacht Fizizi, skippered by the American Skip Novak. Beating conditions are favouring NCB at present, giving the crew cause for some celebration.
Yeah, that really brings it to life, I suppose. I just see one question or one comment in there. Again, James Fagan is a great man with the keys, but He's wondering who was the best MacGyver, and I suppose you have to qualify that. Given Mark Bush wasn't on board, who was the best MacGyver?
Gee, that's a tough one. I'd have to say, and I'm delighted to see his name here, that Johnny Smullen is here somewhere. I know he's dialing in from San Diego, and Johnny was definitely Johnny Smullen MacGyver was.
He was the go-to man.
Fantastic. Now, Johnny, as you know, well, Johnny had joined us for at least half of the race, but up until that time, he was a shore manager, and he was obviously glad that he did join us, and it was great that he did. So I'm glad that he's here. Yeah, Johnny Smullen is my vote. Sorry, to answer your question.
Okay, thank you.
Killian had to be in there as well.
Yeah, that's wrong of me. I hope Killian's not there. He's shooting. You're correct. Anybody who has a boat building background, and I would put myself at the bottom of that list. I carried things.
So yeah, I mean, as we're moving to the end of the webinar, and just to bring to the end of the race, maybe, and seeing the boat sailing there, as I said, it brings it to life. But I do feel it's really largely forgotten what an achievement it was. And you know, that you guys got around the world in an Irish boat, and yeah, troubles here and there, but like, it hasn't been done since. I don't know, I won't say that it will never be done again, but we'll just say it hasn't been done since. But you know, I suppose this is for you, Bob, but as you get to the finish of the final leg, things are coming to a close, could you maybe just quickly talk through that last leg, and then what do you do at the end? Is it grab your oilskins, take your leftover freeze-dried fruit and head for the airport, or what does one do having spent that long sailing around the world together? What happens next?
Well, the last leg to start was incredible, and I'm going to speak only from a personal point of view. It was the leg during which we finished the Whitbread Round the World race, which was, I guess, my big dream. So it was fantastic. The reception we got, family members, friends at the stop was just fantastic. We stayed, as I recall, with the boat and brought it back to Ireland, and we had a number of receptions, one of which was shown at the video at the very beginning of this webinar. And the leadership of the NCB, the various people, treated us for a couple of days in Dublin, and we went to a number of functions, and we wore the cricket jerseys, and it was a great time, to be fair. Personally, myself and I recall Kieran, we delivered the boat back over to, was it Holland, and stuck with the boat for a period of time. So a couple of things that came from it from a personal point of view. Built a network of friends that to this day, while we may not be in regular contact, I would regard them as great friends. I hope they would say the same about everybody else. And for me, from a personal point of view, it heralded the start of 30 years of being involved in the sailing scene and racing boats, and it being a major part of my life for 30 years. Obviously with the exception of this past year when we're stuck in Australia, which is not a bad place to be stuck. We this time last year I just finished the Caribbean 600 on a boat called Prospector, Mills 667, and I've been racing on that for the last 4 years, 3 or 4 events per annum. So I would say that from a personal point of view, doing the race has given me a great number of friends. To this day, I would regard myself as good friends with those people, and an interest and a life in sailing that, to me, I would never have dreamed I could have had. You know, for 30 odd years, I've had 3 or 4 major sailing events each year on big sailing boats. So I consider myself incredibly fortunate, very, very lucky that I got involved in this. It happened at the right time for me, right age, no commitments, reasonably fit and well. And it's certainly, if I were to look back on it, I'd say it was one of the best things ever happened to me.
Big tip.
Definitely.
Yeah, well done, great. Dave, just quickly, because we're getting loads of comments in that I'm going to try and flash through in a second, but looking back, regrets, happiness, happy with the decision?
I mean, the regret isn't that I don't have a Whitbread under my belt, you know. That's the only regret. Doing the race, missing the race, I don't know. It's a hard thing to say because I didn't do it, because literally when we were in Newport before the start of that race, I got approached as well by Irish Sailing that when the race was over, would I take a job as national coach? And that's literally, I went straight into that as national coach. It was sort of the switch from being on the water to now being on land and driving ribs, which I've been doing for the last 30 years.
Okay. Just a couple of the comments that I apologize now to anyone that I missed, because I'm just trying to fly down through a few of them. One for Bob there just says Killian here. So I think that's a reference to who's MacGyver or not.
I hope I put that right. I'm delighted.
We'll scrub it out in the recording, don't worry.
Camouflaged with under his son's name. So good to see you. And if while I have you, it's nice to see you with hair like you used to have on the video.
Pat Vaughan is wondering where the boat is now. I think if you Google, Pat, there was an article in a float maybe in the last 2 or 3 years with pictures of the boat down in the Caribbean, as far as I remember. But if you have a route around, you'll see that. Kevin is referencing Joe O'Rourke in the Volvo 70 a few years ago. Absolutely, yeah. Larry Keating is saying, I made the film on the race, one outstanding. If anyone is interested, it's available on Vimeo. I was also on NCB from Fremantle to Auckland. I was one of the Kiwis on board. So thankfully you didn't offend him. Thanks. Yeah, great memories.
See you, Larry.
To Galway Bay, started sailing dinghies in Loch Ray. And someone, Willie, is saying she's in Trinidad in poor shape. I presume that's the boat, rather than one of the Whitbread women that was greeting you, Bob, when you came into port. So
that's a bit harsh. I thought we were going to keep this.
Oh, look, we're nearly done. We can drop it a little. Yeah, I suppose. Look, guys, I think, and I think, was it Johnny maybe said there that he inspired a generation, and I remember, as I said, as a child looking on at it, and you know, the esteem that, you know, Joe would have been the local man, and the esteem that you held Joe in as a result. And you know, I didn't know much more about it other than that, but it certainly made an impact. And you know, let it not be forgotten that you did it and successfully. So I suppose, look, on behalf of everyone, thanks for sharing the story. We could go on all night. You're good to give up the time, try and dig up the memories. Thanks to everyone for joining. I think there's like 103, and looking at it, you seem to have kept them enthralled because nobody dropped off. So I think Alex is just going to run the video that we were playing at the start again, so if people have seen it, they can drop off or they can just watch it again. But just again, on behalf of everyone, to Dave and Bob, thank you very much, and we will keep in touch.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Thanks so much.
Having raced over 32,000 miles, overcoming fog, icebergs and a variety of design problems, NCB Ireland sailed into Dún Laoghaire Harbour, accompanied by a flotilla of boats and the Navy's biggest ship, the Ellie Etna. The boat received a 13-gun salute from the Defence Forces in the presence of the Taoiseach as she sailed into harbour.
We're very proud of her and her crew, first of all. When I was here on the 13th of August last year sending her off, I said I hoped they would acquit themselves well, and they've done exactly that.
So you think it's done a lot for Irish sailing?
Oh, it's done an awful lot for Irish sailing, yes, and it's given a basis for further competition, and I hope we'll avail of it. I'm sure we will.
Hundreds of people lined the pier to welcome the NCB boat back. The crew, led by skipper Joe English, were then officially welcomed home by the Taoiseach. The skipper later spoke of some of the high points of the race.
Probably the highest point when we were sailing was in the last leg. We worked hard, we got the boat up into third position, we held on into third position for a number of days, and I think to see the guys, the actual determination, the enthusiasm at that time was just fantastic.